I think we are live.
Yes.
Yay! Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another video in a brand new experience, which is me attempting to do this live. This will be fun. Today, I'm joined once again by my very good friend, Rebecca, and we are going to be talking about the Novoteen Book Festival 2016. This is the third year that the festival has been on up in Arlington, Virginia at Washington Lee High School, and this is my second year going. I have a video posted for my experience in my book haul from last year, and I will, of course, link that down below or somewhere in the video on the screen, and it will be gorgeous. But this was Rebecca's first time coming with me because she lives out in South Bend, Indiana, nowhere near Nova, and she flew in specially to come to the event with me, and we had a lot of fun. We did.
Yes, we did.
We had so much fun. So as I said last year, I went to Novoteen Book Festival because I saw that an author whom I really loved was going to be there, and it was kind of the same case this year. The lineup of authors, I think, doubled in size from last year, and there were so many great authors who were there. I mean, I know who you were most excited for. I think we both know.
That was definitely Holly Black.
Holly Black. She was the keynote speaker. She gave the keynote address at the end of all the panels, really right before the signing portion, and I knew that's who you were most excited to see. I was really excited to see Holly Black. I was also quite excited for Jennifer Donnelly, who I've talked about on this channel a couple times. I did a massive book review for her novel Revolution, which I will, of course, again, link here on the screen somewhere. And also other great authors who are going to be there. Josh Sundquist, who's well known for several books, but his most recent was We Should Hang Out Sometime, which is fantastic. He also has a channel here on YouTube, which is very hysterical. I highly recommend it. And man, it was so much fun. So we basically got the hell out of Dodge. Let's see. We had to stop for breakfast, so we were probably on the road by like 6:45.
Yeah, we got in the car at 6:45, and we went to Panera and got breakfast, and then we're on like the actual highway by like 7. Yep.
Yeah, so it definitely was a haul because from Richmond to Arlington, it's a solid 2 hours if you have no traffic, which it's the I-95. There's always traffic. So that usually makes your trip about 2.5 hours. Freakishly enough, we had no traffic. I don't think I went below 55 the whole time I was on the 95, which is shocking for the I-95. We ended up getting there right as the doors were about to open. So the doors opened at 9:30. And they did something different this year. They had a wristband system. So you would get colored wristbands and you would go in. And at first I was kind of curious as to what these wristbands were denoting. I thought it was just to gain you entrance into the...
What is that sound?
I was just about to ask you the same thing because I don't think it was coming from me.
Oh, I think that my phone, because I have a Google phone, is trying to talk to the computer because we're on a Google Hangout. So I'm going to turn my phone off for the duration of this. Because I just got several Google notifications on my phone. So I think that's what that rather obnoxious and terrible sound was. Okay, continue.
All good. So anyway, the wristband system, I thought it was just to gain you entrance into the event, but what they actually did was these wristbands were color-coded. So if you were there right at the start, pretty much there for the opening remarks and stuff, you had a red-colored wristband, which gained you, basically first entrance into the signing room at the end of the festival. So we went in, we got our wristbands, we sat down, and we waited for the opening remarks, which were pretty simple. Like
pretty straightforward.
And then we stayed for the first panel. The first panel was called Creep. It featured Holly Black. It featured
Lisa Maxwell, the author of Unhooked, and Natalie C. Parker, who is the author of Beware the Wild and Behold the Bones.
Yes, of those three authors, I was most familiar with Holly Black. I had heard of the other two and their novels. I just didn't know all that much about them. I knew that Maxwell's Unhooked was a take upon the tale of Peter Pan, and I actually didn't know anything about Beware the Wild or Behold the Bones. I just knew they'd come out, and I knew what their covers looked like. So this panel was talking about kind of the creep factor in young adult lit and how they included it into their books. And it ranged from anything from learning that apparently Holly Black was scared of everything as a child.
Yeah, well, this was actually a fun thing throughout the day, and I guess fun is a loose word there. It was fun for us. Is she brought this up a couple different times where like she grew up in like a haunted house with a mother who was either charmingly quirky or like borderline abusive. It was kind of unclear which one, because her mother, she said, you know, was just convinced that like ghosts were real and supernatural stuff was real, and like Holly was terrified of everything, and before she went to bed she would just be like, hey mom, can you just tell me that like it's gonna be okay? And her mom would go, well, probably nothing's gonna attack you in the night, but we don't know. And would say stuff, you know, like don't astral project, you know, like be careful, don't do that. And just so, you know, Holly kind of grew up in this world where magic was very real to other people, particularly her mother, and that was terrifying. And like basically she was constantly scared that something really terrible was going to happen. So
yeah, and what was interesting was how she then brought that into Darkest Part of the Forest, where it's a world where everybody's aware of the magic that's going on. They're all aware of the fairies and the fair folk, and they're just like, they're there, and they said, you know, every now and then they might like eat a tourist, but hey, that's what tourists are for. Like, and you're just like, what the hell? So it's not the idea of, oh, I need to convince everyone that the magic is real. It's like, no, everybody's already aware that it's there. It's needing to convince them of something else that's occurring with the magic. And it was similar, I think, to Beware the Wild, from what the author was, from what Natalie Parker was saying, was that it was a world where everybody could see ghosts suddenly, but the main character could not. So she was trying to figure out whether she was nuts or if her town was nuts. And I like that. I thought that was interesting. She definitely started piquing my interest towards her book, and I was like, if that were a really good audiobook with like a southern accent, I would definitely listen to it. Because it takes place in like the bayous of like the deep south in a small town, and a lot of the other factors of creep, they were talking about location is always a big one, because all three of their books sort of had a small town feel, I guess with the exception of Neverland, but it's an island. It's a fairly...
Well, but I think that part of what they talked about, though, is that Neverland is sort of like a small town, right? And that it's like this really closed environment where there's not that many people and they all kind of seem to know each other. And so that's like what the thing is about small towns, right? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. My like sound just went weird, and I think that one of my earbuds died. It's fine.
Okay.
Wow. You know, but it's like the small town is, the cool thing about it is that like sort of there's this shared knowledge and shared lore, and so everybody like knows the same things and everybody has the same sort of experience, which for something creepy or unsettling is really useful if they know something that is, you know, creepy or unsettling. And in these stories, as it seems, just kind of okay with that, you know, like the people in Darkest Part of the Forest are like, yeah, sometimes fairies take people, it's cool, whatever.
Never mind. Who actually ends up being a character in the story, which was awesome. But yeah, they talked a lot about collective memory and the power that collective memory has, especially when you're trying to create an atmosphere and a setting, because if you give people a collective memory, it's much easier to believe like stuff that happens and why people react the way they do, because then you start wondering about the collective memory and just how true it is and how much like stuff has been changed over time. I mean, you can look at history for that. I mean, it's great to put that in a small town setting, but it was I thought it was an incredibly fun panel, and I know it definitely did something for you, because when we first got to the event, we bought books pretty much at the start. We usually... Yeah. What I do for this, we'll talk about what you did in a moment. I'm a lot easier to talk about. I went in knowing at least a couple books that I wanted to bring. You were allowed to bring a maximum of 3 books from home to get signed, but the rest you had to purchase at the event. So I did bring 3 books, but then I sat and went, okay, what are some other books that I definitely know I want to get? I knew that I wanted to get These Shallow Graves by Jennifer Donnelly, because it was basically the one that I didn't own, and it's one I'm particularly interested in reading. I knew I wanted to get The Darkest Part of the Forest, because it was the one of Holly Black's books that I had not read that I was most interested in reading. And then I picked up a book called Sword and Verse, which we will get to later, but it was the one that I went into blind and I knew nothing about, really. I didn't know the author, didn't know all that much about the book, but it looked kind of interesting from what little I'd seen. But I bought those 3 and I said, if these authors, like if I really like what I'm hearing at the panel and I really, really, really want to buy their book, then I can buy their book afterwards. You had a little different approach.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought about bringing 3 books because you could bring up to 3 to get them signed, and I have many books by Holly Black, and then I also had Snow Like, oh no, I'm gonna do it wrong.
Oh, you were close.
Snow Like Ashes and Ice Like Fire. I'm sorry. For some reason, like I always want to say Snow Like Fire and Ice. I don't even know.
Ice Like Ashes.
Anyway, but I decided not to bring them for a couple reasons. The first is going to be, honestly, I a little bit forgot. But really it was, but there was a semi-conscious thing going on there because I traveled and I actually flew, I had to be able to fit all of the books in my suitcase. And so my thought process was I'm going to buy, probably about 8-ish, maybe like up to 10 books. I don't want to bring books because then that's less room in my thing and whatever. I'll just buy stuff and get everything signed anyway. So, yeah, so that was my thought process there. So I had in advance, I'd looked at, they had the featured books, online for the event page. And so I looked at those and I picked some books that I was like, I don't know if under normal circumstances I would buy this, but I get to meet the author and I get to get it signed and I'm interested enough that I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then some that I was like super interested in. And so I knew those, but then what happened is when we walked in, there was just tables full of books. And Mad knows this. I don't have a lot of self-control when it comes to books. I just really don't have a lot of self-control. It's fine. And so I found like the 8 that I had known about, but I also found other ones because in addition to the featured books for every author, they had other books and then some that hadn't shown up on the featured list, or I guess that I just hadn't noticed.
I think on that list they'd shown their most recent release.
Yeah,
they didn't show all of their books, though. If you went to try and pre-order books, I think they started listing like all of the books they were planning on having there. But
okay,
I didn't pre-order books. I was like, I like to shop around. I don't know. I'm not gonna.
Yeah. Well, I didn't pre-order because part of the pre-order process was that like you could get them pre-signed, and to me that sort of ruined the point a little bit because I really wanted to actually like go say hi to the author and talk to them, even though I'm awkward and don't say much.
We'll get to our awkward authors.
We'll get to our awkward author signings in a minute. But so I actually ended up buying 12 books at the very beginning. So I had like the 8 that I wanted, and then I found 4 others. And actually, I don't even think I had the 8 that I wanted. I think I missed one. So I had 7 that I had planned, and then 5 that I had unplanned, not planned. And so then I just had, this giant stack of books that I was carrying around with me all day and didn't think about the fact that then I was going to listen to authors speaking and we'll learn more about some of the other books. So some of the books that I was not particularly interested in initially, I became super interested in, particularly all of the books that were discussed at the Creep panel. I originally I'd seen Unhooked, especially on like Goodreads and stuff. It had made the rounds, but I was like, I'm kind of sick of Peter Pan stories. I'm gonna be real about that. I feel like every like TV show and movie ever that is being made is like a twist on the Peter Pan story. But then we were listening to Lisa Maxwell talk about Unhooked and some of the things she did in it, and like the direction she was going with it and what interested her about the story. And I was like, yeah, okay, I have to read this book.
I think at one point I leaned over to you and I was like, if she pulls off half of the things that she's talking about in this book is going to be freaking amazing.
Yes.
I found funny because I know you'd mentioned that you weren't real interested in Unhooked because of the Peter Pan thing. And I'll say for myself, I like the original Peter Pan story. Like, it's fine. I don't go crazy for it. I kind of look at it like I do with, like, Alice in Wonderland, and that there's often almost, like, a cult devoted to it in terms of, like, super fans, and I'm not there. Like, I appreciate them. I like them. They're fine, but I don't chase them actively.
Yeah. So that happened with that. And then also, Natalie C. Parker just, like, totally stole my heart. She's one of my new favorite humans in the entire world. I'm following her on Twitter, and I will probably like and retweet everything she writes ever. And I don't know what it was, like, because I know Behold the Bones was her new one. Beware the Wild is the first one. And for whatever reason, it didn't catch my eye on the site when I was, like, picking books that I was interested in reading, which is kind of weird to me because actually, like, the subject matter is really in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I think for myself, like I'd sort of been aware of it. I knew exactly what all the covers looked like. I'd seen them before. I think it's because someone had pitched it to me as a paranormal romance, so I sort of immediately said I don't want to read it because that's so not my genre. But from listening to her speak, I'm like, I don't think this is a paranormal romance at all. Why did someone tell me it was?
Yeah, and she talked a little bit more about Beware the Wild, which is the first one I purchased actually after that panel. Because it's the first in the series, and that's the one that she had talked about the most, but it just, the way that she described it and was talking about it, I was like, why the heck was this not on my list? Like, this sounds like something I'm super interested in. But also, she was talking about some things, and I will freely admit that I'm like all into the feminist camp. I love them badass women.
Talk about it.
And she said that one of her publishers or editors or someone during the process had said to her that her main character was unrealistic because she was a Southern girl who spoke in words that had more than 2 syllables. She was too intelligent to be a Southern girl. And Natalie C. Parker just was like, what? Like, are you kidding me?
Face in that room from people who were listening and on the panel just went, like, everybody was so shocked that that had even been said. Now, to be fair, I live in Virginia, but I grew up around Buffalo, New York until I was about 11, so I'm still basically a northerner. But I'm just like, on behalf of women who are from the South, no, wrong. Fight me.
There was mass outrage when she said that. Like, everyone in the room was just like, oh my God! Are you kidding me? This is insane!
Everybody sort of went, that got said? Like, yeah.
So that was a learning experience for me in terms of the things that people have to deal with when they're getting books published, that I just hadn't even really thought about as a thing that would even be a thing. So, but anyway, just essentially during that entire panel, everything all 3 of the authors were saying, which was not necessary for Holly Black because I already adored her. Like, I went into this thing thinking she was the greatest ever, and then she just continued to exceed my expectations, and I basically worship the ground she walks on. It's fine.
I will say with Holly Black, I already loved her too, but between the 2 of us, we'd read very different Holly Black books. You read
we had split the canon in half.
Yes, pretty much. You'd read everything involving fairies and Spiderwick, and I'd read all of her other stuff. I read the Magisterium series she co-writes with Cassie Clare. I'd read The Coldest Girl in Cold Town, which was her vampire novel, and I'd read the Curse Workers trilogy, which is her basically magical mafia trilogy. So, like, we were completely split on what we'd read by Holly Black. But I have to say, when she mentioned, I believe it's in Valiant, where she talks about her main character who, because this is in the first couple pages of the novel, it's not spoilers, apparently comes home, finds her boyfriend and her mom having sex with each other, and she, like, shaves her head and just runs away to go hang out with fairies. And I was just like, I love the sound of this book. Why did I not read it? Probably because fairies. And for some reason, fairies are like an immediate turn-off in a novel for me, and I have no idea why. Like, I have no basis for this, like, horrible, like, fairyism. Like, but I immediately was like, I think I need to maybe read these books. I'm really glad I picked up Darkest Part of the Forest, too, but, like, ooh, interesting. It was neat.
Yeah, so that was funny, and in my defense, the reason that I hadn't read Coldest Girl in Cold Town and The Curse Workers is because somehow I had no idea they existed and that they were books. But it's fine because I bought them all. So, and now I have all of the audiobooks for them as well, so there will be much Holly Black in the future.
Yeah, for anybody who has not listened to any of those audiobooks, the audiobooks for the Curse Workers trilogy, the first book being White Cat, are narrated by Jesse Eisenberg, aka that guy from The Social Network who we all know. He's quite fantastic, and the Coldest Girl in Cold Town, I don't know who narrates it off the top of my head, but my experience with Coldest Girl in Cold Town was borrowing the audiobook from my library for no good reason, and then starting it at night, in the dark, figuring I'd go to sleep 30 minutes and figured I'd go to sleep, and that was the biggest mistake I ever made because the book opens on a girl waking up at a party and finding out everybody has been just slaughtered by vampires, and it is one of the most terrifying openings I've ever listened to, like, ever. I've never listened to a book that made me go, what? Just whoa, pause, no.
Yeah, Holly Black doesn't kid around. She really doesn't.
That was actually my first Holly Black book. That was my introduction to Holly Black.
Oh my. Okay, yes.
Really terrifying.
Yeah.
Terrifying. But yeah, her panel, the Creep panel was so good. And then it finished, you went and bought those books pretty much straight away, right after the panel, right?
I got Unhooked and Beware the Wild straight after the panel. Like, I just went straight out and got them. And part of that was not just because I don't have self-control, but also because I knew they had purchased a limited number of every book, and I didn't want to get to the end of the day and discover that the books I was interested in weren't there.
Yeah, which is something that happened to me last year when I wanted to get The Boy in the Black Suit by Jason Reynolds, who's actually there again this year, and I didn't get to see his panel, and I was so bummed. But last year I'd wanted to get that book after he talked about it, and they like sold out before I got the chance to get to it. I was like, what? Disappointment. But okay, so you bought those books, and then we turned right around, and Holly Black was doing kind of a one-on-one Q&A panel, so we went straight into that one and really just got to listen to her talk about so many things. All about writing really was the big part of it, and world building came up a lot.
Yeah, and writing fantasy, although she didn't get. So I was actually really impressed with the way she handled this, because she managed to actually like answer questions and talk about everything at every panel she did. But her keynote was on why she writes fantasy and like what's the value of fantasy. And I thought she actually did an excellent job in the panels that we saw her in of not just like rehashing what would later be her keynote.
Yeah, because I think she maybe used one story and like repeated it, and that was it. But it was like, it was such a small anecdote, you had to have been there to have heard it, and it was like very brief. But yeah, because her keynote was so fantastic. But her one-on-one panel I liked. I love those settings where it's like, it feels much more intimate because you're just in a classroom with them.
Yeah.
It's them and a moderator, basically, or just a person kind of asking general questions before it's opened up to the audience. And all of us just sitting there looking at Holly Black going, please, give us the contents of your brain. We're desperate to know. We're desperate.
Yeah, and so it was really awesome because there were some preset, I guess is the way you would say it, questions from the moderator. But then I would say a good like half of it was just like, hey, ask me questions. And so people asked, you know, the broad range of everything from collaborative writing, like how do you do that? How do you do characters? What's this? Whatever. We got some like really awesome nuggets, like about how she doesn't like to draft books.
Nope.
Drafting is terrible, but she loves revising because revising is like cleaning the bathroom. You can't make it worse. And I was like, that's amazing.
That was one of the best quotes of the day, because you just heard the whole room erupt in laughter, and we were all looking at each other like, yep, that's pretty much how that goes. Because as from someone who absolutely despises drafting, me, and who loves editing so much that it can be a problem, like right now, actively writing my book, I cannot go back and reread portions I've already read, because if I do, I will start editing, and then I'll never stop editing, and nothing will get done. I have eternal editor syndrome, so I need to like crank through even if it hurts. So that nugget, I was just like, yes, I completely understand this statement. I understand it so much. I completely empathize. Yeah, she talked about that. She talked about, I'm trying to think of when she was asked about world building. And I remember this only because several people asked her about world building, probably because her worlds are so interesting. She tends to write.
And they're so different from like, even book to book, like so in the Modern Fairy Tale series, Tithe and Valiant are technically in the same world and are like tangentially related, but their worlds are super, super different. And like, it's incredible. It's just incredible how she brings a setting to life the way she does, and how she can do such different things in every single book she writes.
Yeah, and the great part about that is also that for me, I mean, I've noticed she writes urban fantasy. That's pretty much what she seems to really like writing, but all of her urban fantasy is really different. Like the Tide trilogy, which I have not yet read, I'm gathering is probably very different from The Darkest Part of the Forest, which is very different from The Curse Workers, different from Cold Stone Cold Town, very different from the Magisterium series she's writing with Cassandra Clare. And she talked about world building, and also planning, how she would always imagine herself like writing on all the note cards and being organized and such like that. And then she went, yeah, that never happened. It never worked out. Though she did mention Scrivener was a program that she liked, and I've heard a lot of authors bring up Scrivener.
I haven't. I actually saw a lot about it at the end of Nano this year, because it was part of like the winner's package was a huge discount on it. But I mean, like, I'm like a very straightforward writer. Like, I literally have like a loose outline, and then I just type the entire document in Google Docs, so I don't know that I would really benefit from it. But she talked a lot about how useful it has been for her, because you can save like images in there, and save idea and blah, 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 and it's all in like one project, so.
Which is stuff that I would maybe like, but I really like to handwrite my notes. I'm one of those weird people who still does a lot of handwriting. So like I have notebook pages scattered all throughout different notebooks with like my notes for one story. And I have to start like tearing them out and keeping them in folders and like in a drawer in my desk. So I'm like, I would get Scrivener, but I don't know how much use it would do me because I like handwriting stuff so much. But it was interesting to hear how she talks about, she's like, I imagine myself being very organized with this process, and then it's not. Between that and when she was talking about writing Darkest Part of the Forest, how she realized one of her characters had a secret from her. And she was like,
yeah,
which is such an interesting conversation, because you think about it, I think a lot of us go into writing, we think we are basically gods playing with you. You are our little puppets and on strings, and I make you do whatever I want. Dance, puppet, dance. And then it's like, no, because sometimes characters will totally surprise you as you're writing. And that's definitely what Holly Black talked about in that panel, where she's just like, my main character was suddenly hiding something from me, and I realized I didn't know what it was. So I was sort of going on the journey with her. It was a little scary. I'm like, well, I'm glad, because it ended up being a very good book.
I'm like, sad for you, wonderful Holly Black.
Well. So we went to that panel. After that, we had made lunch plans, which ended up running over, which was sad for us because we missed a panel we both really wanted to go to. Lesson learned, don't make lunch plans if you go. They have food trucks there. Just get food at the food trucks.
Yeah, don't miss any of the panels. Like, it was really cool because we met someone we'd never met in real life, and we had Chinese hot pot, which was delicious. But in retrospect, it was like, ooh, we should have made like a dinner plan or like a post-dinner drinks plan or something with those persons.
In retrospect,
because we just really didn't want to have missed anything, and we missed stuff, and so that was...
Yeah, that was sad, because then we showed up for the last panel, which the name of which completely escaped. No, Do I Ever Cross Your Mind?
Yes.
Well, something like that. And it was mainly young adult contemporaries. We missed the opening couple minutes of it, not too much, actually. I think we only missed like 5.
We missed like 5 minutes of it, yeah. Yeah,
the opening 5 minutes, and we walked in. So that had the authors for, I wonder if I actually have my thing. I'm trying to remember. We had Julie Murphy.
Symptoms of Being Human.
Yep. It had Dumplin', which was Julie Murphy, who had written Side Effects May Vary beforehand.
Some of Your Parts, which I don't remember the author for that one, but it's about someone whose brother dies, and then he donated his organs, and so it's supposed to be an interesting...
Yeah, there was another one that I can see the cover. It has a
band. It's about a band.
Yeah, there's the one that's about a band that was originally entitled +1 and then got changed. I remember that because the author talked about it, and I went, that's punny. I wish they'd been able to keep that. But there was the one with, like, it's got like a fraying rope on the cover, and I can't remember what it's called, and I believe it involves a character dealing with addiction.
Yeah.
And I've kind of heard of it, but not enough that I can remember it very presently. And I think those were the only ones on the panel.
Yeah, that was the 5 of them. So I think, I don't know about for you, but for me, it was actually a super interesting panel. We hadn't initially planned on going to it. Like, I had thought about it because it was about, like, friendships, relationships, and identity, essentially, in all of these books, which just sort of loosely tied them together. There were a couple other panels at the same time that we were like, I might be interested in that. But then we ended up going to it because we were late, and it was in the room that kind of would be least disruptive.
Into without anybody caring, because I wanted initially to go to the Jennifer Donnelly one, but when I passed it, I was like, it would be so disruptive for me to walk into that room right now and like try and find a seat, because it was actually a fairly full room too, and it was like super small. So I was like, I'll just go to this big panel. That's fine.
We'll just do it. And it was really cool because I don't read a lot of YA contemporary, and I think part of that is because I'm, first of all, generally more interested in fantasy, but also, like, I'm not a teenager anymore, so, like, things that concern high schoolers and stuff, just I don't connect with it as much. So when I'm reading books that are very, like, contemporary, I am a high school student, here's what's going on, and I missed my 3rd period class or whatever, I'm kind of like, okay.
Oh, you have not read contemporary in a while. From someone who reads a lot of YA contemporary, it's definitely changed since that.
I don't know. I just listened to the Never Never by Colleen Hoover, and I forget.
That's not YA. That's new adult.
I don't know what that means.
New adult is aimed at people who are basically our age range, early to mid 20s. So that's actually considered new adult. It's not considered YA.
Okay, well, but they were like in high school and had like high school classes and stuff going on. So I don't know. It's not like high school kids can be really interesting. And frankly, I think one of the reasons that YA is so popular is because the period when you're in high school, there's so much self-discovery and so much development going on that like literally you could take any subject and make it a really interesting and emotional journey. Mm-hmm. But I am, you know, in my late 20s, and so I just I don't know. So
I mean, if you're not into it, you're not into it. I was sort of surprised because I knew you weren't super interested in that panel because I think it was YA contemporary.
Yeah.
But
I loved it.
We had a lot of difficulty last year because it's a lot of YA contemporary authors.
Yeah, there was a lot more. There was a lot of fantasy and a lot of interesting stuff at this one. That I think probably because Holly Black was there, and so there was kind of like a reverberating.
Yeah, they had that last year, but I think overwhelmingly it was more contemporary than like fantasy anything last year. Though I mean, they did have Tamora Pierce and Morgan Rhodes and other people there last year, which was pretty cool. But yes, so we went to the contemporary panel, which was very interesting. We walked in, they were in the middle, I think, of just sort of talking about what their books were really about beyond just like the plot.
Yeah.
Because the author of Symptoms of Being Human was talking about his. And he was talking about how he goes, you know, it was really difficult to write the book because he goes, I'm not a teen who's dealing with like gender fluidity. He goes, I identify as a straight male. He goes, so I can't even, it's like at first glance, I can't even imagine him to wake up every day and know that that's going to be the first thing on my mind because it's going to be my biggest struggle of the day. And it's going to happen every day without fail.
Yep.
Which I thought was actually a great answer because I was very curious about that book.
Yeah, and so that was cool. And then just listening to the others, like I know the woman who wrote the book about addiction, actually, like that was a lived experience for her. As someone in her family had a long and really terrible struggle with addiction, but has recently been in recovery, and she said was like able to meet her kids for the first time recently and stuff. So that was really moving, and it was really interesting to hear. So it was just really like, it was a cool panel, one of those where you learn more about the books and then you just kind of have fun with the authors. Like they asked, one of the questions was, what is if the NSA got into your Google search history, what would be the weirdest thing they would find? And so that was interesting because it ranged from like, well, I had to research drugs for this reason or this reason.
I had to research
to like taxidermy. Someone talked about like how to do like taxidermy or like weird things. What were some of the other funky ones?
Dolly Parton's bra size.
Dolly Parton's bra size. Yep.
There was Dolly Parton's process. There was, I mean, when she was asking about organ donation, she's like, I had to basically call and then research a lot of very specific questions. And I'm like,
oh yeah, because actually it was about like if someone was going to
try and break the rules,
do something wrong, like break the rules, like how would they do it? So she was talking to doctors specifically, and the doctors were like a little concerned that she was like a plant, and so they're like, well, you don't do that, like you don't break the rules. And she's like, okay, like I get it, like you are not going to do this, that's fine, but if someone were going to do this, how would they do it? And so that was funny.
For the sake of argument, they were going to try, but how exactly would they get around it?
Yep.
Which that was entertaining because she's like, yeah, I can imagine that was supremely awkward for all these doctors. I was calling, I'm like, oh, you think? You think that's a little awkward? They're all worried about their jobs then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that was the last major panel, and then it was Holly Black's keynote on why she writes fantasy, which was a fantastic keynote, which also involved the clicker not really working every time. There was always like,
yeah, so like every time she was trying to change slides, it was like,
you'd always be like, I will find it. I will find the sweet spot of that clicker. And the sweet spot of the clicker seemed to shift like within the span of clearly at least a couple feet, like with every time she needed to use it. It was like, there is no sweet spot. It migrates. But it was a fantastic keynote address on why she writes fantasy, and she brought up books from her childhood that she remembered reading, her experiences with her mom and living in a haunted house. She showed a really adorable picture of her adopted son.
Oh my God, so cute.
Precious. She was so funny because she talked about he was apparently some like hideous sweater that like really we didn't realize how hideous it was.
Yeah, she said it was the sweater her mom made, and she's like, and this is the hideous sweater my mom made for him. And everyone's like, that's so cute though. Like, what are you talking about? And she was like, you don't understand. It like really is different sizes on both sides and like whatever. And the picture just doesn't show it. And we were like, whatever, it's a cute sweater.
It was very funny. I remember that she told a story that had come out of one of her fairy tale like books that involved the legend of a man building his house on a ferry road. Yeah. And like, how that ended up very poorly for him. And he had to like just cut off part of his house. I'm like, cool story, bro. I'll tell it again. That's she had a fantastic quote from G.K. Chesterton that was just like, it said, fairy tales do not teach children that there are dragons, but that dragons can be killed, which was...
Well, it's like fairy tales are true not because they tell kids that dragons exist, but because they say that dragons can be killed, which Neil Gaiman has famously requoted, and which I'm much more familiar with. So I actually had studied G.K. Chesterton in school, and I had no idea that that's where the quote originally came from, but what I know of G.K. Chesterton makes it not surprising, because he talks a lot about fairy tales and like has a whole thing on fairyland. But yeah, Neil Gaiman's quote is, you know, like, fairy tales are true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us dragons can be beaten, and I kind of want to get that tattooed. But anyway, that was cool. And then there was another quote who, dang, I have this up on Twitter, who it was by Terry Pratchett, that said, fantasy, it's something, I don't remember the first sentence, about fantasy being true, because it makes us fully human, and like being human is where the falling angel and the rising ape meet. And that's something that you get in fantasy that you don't get elsewhere.
Yeah, it was a great quote, and really what she talked about, she says fantasy was great because you could take things and experiences that are very real to people. I mean, anything you could talk about incredibly intense and heavy topics, which are often very difficult to approach in regular fiction. She goes, and then you can put them in kind of a fantasy land and almost in a way disguise them through something magical and still being able to talk about it, but in a way that's oftentimes more accessible, especially for younger readers and like teen readers, because we can easily believe in like humans and fairies hating each other, and we can read that and digest that, and oftentimes that's easier to read than trying to read about like racism, which is basically what that is.
Right.
And, which I thought that was great that she brought that up. And she also, of course, said that this is in no way trying to say that like fantasy is better than other kinds of fiction. She's just like, this is why I choose to write fantasy. Because I find it easier to write this than trying to write like a contemporary or something, or like literary fiction. She goes, because I can talk about something else by using fairies and vampires. She goes, I can talk about, what did she say? She used the vampires to talk about reality television.
Yep.
Cold's Grown Cold Town very much does. She wrote Curse Workers basically to write a magical heist novel with the magical mafia, but it also deals with the magic in the Curse Workers involves something that's called a blowback. So if you use your luck, some sort of little bit of magic that you have, it's going to rebound on you in equal part, basically. She goes, so basically it's the idea that every action has a consequence. In this case, to use magic has a very physical consequence to you, good or ill, depending on how you use the magic. Basically, it sucks to be a death worker. Like, let's just get that out there. If you've got death magic, please don't use it. Don't use it. You may die, and you don't know what part of you it's going to be, so it could actually kill you. But I like that that's what she said, like, that's why she really likes to write fantasies, that she goes, I can talk about other things while also doing a fun fantasy story that I enjoy.
And one of her, like, another really good point, which I think is used really a lot, especially in YA fantasy, is when you're trying to write about the real experience of teenagers who feel like they're different and like they stand out and whatever. In fantasy, there are avenues by which you do that where people actually legitimately are. So she writes like changeling stories, for example, where like, oh, you feel different, you feel like you don't fit in. That's because you're actually from a different world inserted into this one. And guess what? You're different. And
so on the flip side, she goes, oftentimes in fantasy, you'll often have characters who aren't special. They're like completely ordinary in a world that's fairly extraordinary, which plays into that as well. It's like, you feel alienated? Yeah, well, you're the only person who, like, Where the Wild, who can't see ghosts in a town of people who can all see ghosts. In Darkest Part of the Forest, she's, the protagonist is like, I'm not special. Like, I don't have any magic or luck wished upon me. She goes, my brother got that. I got nothing. She goes, like, I'm not special, surrounded by special people. And even in like Cold Stone Cold Town, the main character's not a vampire. She's just kind of a normal, everyday girl. Like, and shit happens. And so that's one of the beautiful things about fantasy is you can play with the who is or isn't extraordinary or ordinary.
Right. And so that's, you know, like you said, Mad, it's not saying that fantasy is like better than any other genre, but certainly I think why I enjoy consuming fantasy perhaps more than other genres and why I write it as well is because it really does take all of these real life issues and then you're able to magnify them and play with them in a way that you're not necessarily able to do in a real, if you're trying to create a real world, but in fantasy you can change the rules and you can really draw like certain issues out. And she had this awesome quote from a phone call she had with Neil Gaiman, which, okay, so Holly Black is like one of my favorite authors, right? And Neil Gaiman is my favorite adult fantasy, one of them. And Holly Black has done several collaborations and was talking about that. And and they both write these kind of like dark, like slightly twisted sort of stories. And so I turned to Mad before the keynote and I said, you know, God, if Holly Black and Neil Gaiman ever did a collaborative project, like, I think I would die. Like, that would be the greatest day ever. And then she gets up during her keynote and she starts talking about Lucifer, the comic she's writing, that Neil Gaiman, like, owns Lucifer. And so this is a collaborative. And I was like, oh my God, like, this is actually happening. I'm freaking out right now.
She reached over and gripped my arm, like, so hard. I worried I was going to lose blood flow. I was like, I think you're excited. Are you excited? Yes, so she is writing a series of basically comic/graphic novel issues involving the DC character.
Marvel. No, is it DC? I thought it was Marvel. I don't know.
Someone will correct us. Character of Lucifer, which is written and basically owned by Neil Gaiman because he comes from the Sandman comics, I think.
I think it's somehow, I didn't know enough about this and I have to do more research because I'm like, how is this not in my life? I don't know.
I'm just going to wait for when the first like bound up graphic novel comes out because clearly the little comic issues are already coming out. So I'm behind. I'll be like, I'll just wait for the first bound up graphic novel and just be like, give me, thank you. I'll take that. But that was probably the funniest moment because this all took place within the span of like 10 minutes. Not even 10.
I know. Like, I just absolutely freaked out. But okay, the point is that she was talking during her talk about a conversation she had with Neil Gaiman where he said to her, you know, the plot is kind of what happens when all the other actual important stuff is happening. You know, so it's just like sort of like what's going on while the real stuff is going on. And I thought that was just a really awesome insight into particularly YA, but I think most really good writing is that really what a book is about is so many things and things that are so much deeper and more complex than just this person went on a journey or they were saving this person. And maybe the plot is what moves the story forward, but it's not really like the point. And so I don't know. I was like, whoa, this is amazing.
Yeah, that was something I like. And that's why oftentimes when I talk about plot, I learned this from a professor. We talked about plot. We divided it in two. You had a lowercase p plot and capital P plot. So capital P plot was like, what is the book like about? That's the capital P plot. The lowercase p plot is just like what's happening. Like, okay, yes, they're going from point A to point B. That's the plot. But the overarching, the big plot is what is the book about? Like, that's when you're just like, that's what this book is about. So that's why I loved hearing that bit because I went, yes, you were kind of reaffirming what I've already been thinking in my head because schooling. Yay! Because we talk about that and when we were in script writing and stuff like that. But I think we should probably move on to the part that everybody cares about, which is the book selling. So you go to these so that you can get books and get them signed and have experiences. So I brought 3 books from home. The first one I brought, I was able to continue getting Sarah Rush to sign my stuff because I had brought Snow Like Ashes last year because she was there. And she was there to sign Ice Like Fire, which is very exciting. So this one has her little thing that she writes in it is Let It Burn, because she would write Let It Snow in the previous one. And she has these cool little trading cards, which she's had, which represent the different seasons. So for those of you who don't know, this series takes place in the fantasy world where the kingdoms are divided by season. So I remember getting the winter one last time. It had like the locket, which is their conduit. So this time I got autumn with the ring. So I was actually kind of excited she was going to be there because she wasn't initially. She was like a bonus author. And I was just like, yay! The second book that I got signed, because he was sitting basically only a couple, I was sort of going in a big circle, a couple authors over, and another one that I brought from home was We Should Hang Out Sometime by Josh Sundquist, which was like, for me, probably the most embarrassing and awkward conversation I had because I was super nervous because for those of you who don't know, this is his memoir about how he turned like 25 and realized he'd never had a serious girlfriend. And he started going back and asking all the girls, like kind of throughout his romantic history about this. And I related to this on a painfully real level. And I don't ever know how to start conversations. I'm not fantastic with people. I have kind of mild social anxiety. So I was literally like shaking and I did not know how to speak or human. It was great because he was also the only author who was actually sitting on the tables as opposed to sitting in the chair behind the tables. So I was trying to be like, you're a rebel sitting on the table. And then it just started off awkward and ended up okay. But he did sign that. And I did tell him that I'd sort of like been flinging the book at all my friends. And actually one of my other friends, a different Rebecca, who I call Becca, was there. And she got this book and got it signed. She was like, yeah, I told him it was because I remember seeing it on your Instagram. And I was like, oh, thank God. That's probably a good thing. But that was awkward conversation as all get out because I'm awkward and can't human. But he's very, very nice. And and he was having like full-blown conversations with pretty much anyone who went up to get the book signed. It wasn't just like, hey, how are you, whatever. It's like he would take the time and have long conversations, which I thought was pretty cool. Pretty cool. Why don't you hold up a couple of your books while I organize the rest of my stash, because you've got a lot to go through.
I have many. Okay, so first we have Coldest Girl in Cold Town, because I, for whatever reason, didn't know that this was a thing. So yeah, I got it signed by Holly Black, who has the coolest signature ever. It's fine. It's fine. And actually, I also got the Curse Workers trilogy, and I did not get those signed for reasons that I don't actually understand.
I know, you were there. You should have.
I don't know. I was there. I talked to her. I think that because Mad was behind me in line to talk to Holly Black, and I was so concerned about us getting a picture with her.
We did get a picture, which is on my Instagram, I believe, which is at Mad Cassier. If any of you don't know, the links should all be down below.
Yes. And so then I also got Beware the Wild and Behold the Bones. I don't know if you can see what's happening.
And she drew pictures in your book, right?
Yeah, and so she drew, okay, so first of all, like literally Natalie C. Parker is probably my new favorite human. So she drew pictures. I'm trying to think of the best way to show this.
You got it.
Okay, so there's an alligator down here, obviously, and then up here my favorite is she started by saying enjoy, but then crossed it out and drew an arrow to beware. So I was like, yes, Natalie, you are my hero and I love you. And then this one I'm assuming has something to do with heritage because she wrote know your roots and she drew a tree.
Ooh, that makes sense.
So I'm like super interested. So that was really, really awesome. So that's one of the cool things about, you know, the book signing is you get to go and like talk to them while this is going on and actually have conversations. So she was one of the ones where the line wasn't huge when I went to get my book signed by her. So I talked to her for a little while. I love her. I just love her. So I'm super excited about the books. I don't know if how much I love her is going to affect my enjoyment of them. I suspect it probably will. So just so you know, my opinion will be biased when I tell you that I enjoy them a lot. But not that biased, because if I hate a book, I hate a book. But, you know.
I mean, I get that because like I said, my author I wanted to see was Jennifer Donnelly, because Revolution, like this book, as I said, I've had a review for it. I was doing my best not to basically sob when I was like, this book was so important to me when I read it, because I was going through a pretty rough time when I read it. And one of the characters in here is dealing with like crippling depression. Like it made me want to hug the character so hard. And I was just like, why am I even complaining about my life? Like, this poor character. Just let me hug and love you. And actually, I think she thought it was funny because this is actually a UK paperback, which you can tell because it's like this weird, awkward size. But she signed it and said, turn the key, which I obviously get the reference because I've read the book. But her other book that I picked up, These Shallow Graves, now they had several of Donnelly's books there because she's written quite a lot of books. This book I'm so excited for because what I've gathered is it's a kind of murder mystery set in an insane asylum in turn of the 20th century New York. I was like, excuse me, you've hit like so many buzzwords in that one pitch that I am so ready. And this one said dig deep, which I was like, that's actually kind of creepy if this is a murder mystery. I don't want to dig deep. I don't want to find bodies. But it was cool. Yeah, and like you said, it's cool to talk to them. Like, her line was actually fairly like steady the whole time, so I didn't want to take up too much time, but I managed to like word vomit how much I really liked these books. And then, like you, I got some Holly Black. I had gotten Darkest Part of the Forest, which I immediately read the next morning. I sat and read it in one sitting. Easy reading. Got that signed. And Holly Black does have like one of the coolest signatures ever. She somehow managed to get that worked out. And then Rebecca decided I needed to read the Tithe trilogy. So got me the entirety of the Tithe trilogy, and it is also signed, and like Beware the Wild, is signed in silver because black pages, which actually I'd been smart and packed gold and silver Sharpies in my bag just in case because I didn't know. I over-prepare. But I only have one left, so why don't you go through a whole bunch more of yours?
Okay, go through a whole bunch more. Why not? Okay, so one of their featured books is A Tyranny of Petticoats, which is a collection of short stories about badass women in different historical settings. It's really cool. I also got a drawing that went along with this that depicts all 15 heroines. But they had the editor there as well as one of the authors, so I got that.
Lindsay Smith was there, right?
Yes. So I got that signed, and I don't know if you can read it, but basically I got Reclaim Your History and Be Badass were the two messages I got in there. So that was pretty awesome, and I'm super excited about reading this delightful collection.
Well, if you like Lindsay Smith's story in there, I've read two of her books now. I read one that was called Dreamwalker, which I liked, and then another one which I liked even more. It was called Secret, which was basically like X-Men in Russia with teens. It's pretty cool.
I also got These Shallow Graves and Revolution. So Matt has already talked about those, so I'm not gonna.
I went in and all I was talking about was how excited I was for Jennifer Donnelly. I was like,
yeah, she was very excited. So I got excited, yay! So then I got this book called Misfit by John Scavron, I guess is how you would say his name. I really should know that. He was actually, I'm pretty positive about this, the moderator for a lot of the panels and introduced Holly Black for her keynote. And so I was like, actually got this at the beginning before I had heard anything because it says on the front, a diabolically delightful paranormal, Holly Black. So I was like, oh, well, I love Holly Black, and she writes great stuff, so she's repping this, so I'm going to go ahead and get it. So I'm kind of excited about it, although somehow I missed him, and I didn't get it signed, which is really depressing to me. I didn't see, I know he was there, but I think he might have been hidden behind a line.
He was right next to Josh Sundquist, and Josh Sundquist, I mean, we got in pretty early because we'd gotten red wristbands, but when it opened up more, his line ended up getting so long.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was sad. So, but it's cool because I saw him speak and stuff, and I know that he's like a huge fan of Holly Black, and actually had a really funny story about how when he was first introduced to YA, what books did he read?
Oh, he read, I think he read The Modern Fairy.
No, that was what but there were some that he had read beforehand that I guess were just like super typical, like high school stories, and he was not really like into that. And then he picked up Valiant, which I love that Valiant kept coming up because it's like probably my favorite Holly Black. It's so good. And as we talked about earlier in the first chapter, the main character walks in on her mom and her boyfriend having sex, and then she shaves her head and runs away to New York City. And he was like, "What? You can do that? Like that's like something you can do in YA? That's allowed?" And so that really got him excited about writing YA. So that was cool. So I'm excited to read that. I also got Arrows, which is a Cupid story.
Yeah.
That I'm like super interested in this. So I'm gonna be real. This is one of the ones where like I would have seen it on the shelf at a store and been like, yeah, I'm kind of interested. Not sure I'm gonna buy it, but I was like, you know what? I kind of want to meet this author and I want to get it signed, and she's gonna be there. So I think this is her first book. So we talked a little bit about that, but it just says, you know, to Rebecca, to love and be loved. And so it's cool. So I'm like kind of excited about this. It's very short, by the way.
It is quite short. Yeah, I was gonna say I saw you like pick that one up, and I was like, I think that's the Cupid book.
Yeah, so that'll be probably a one-sitting read. And I'm excited about it. So that's cool. Then I got Dumplin'. By Julie Murphy. So I'm really excited about this as a body positive feminist. This is about a larger teenage main character who basically is super self-loving and embracing herself and all of that. And so it's Rebecca, y'all hail the queen. Also, Julie Murphy is amazing.
She's awesome. And I'd read her other book before that it was called Side Effects May Vary, which involved a teen with cancer. And if I remember calling the book correctly, she's like diagnosed, figures she's going to die. So she like kind of says all this stuff and then turns out she doesn't die. Oh, deal with the if I'm remembering the book correctly. It was a couple of years ago. I ended up giving it to a friend because I knew that she would like it. But yeah, I'd heard a lot of really great things about Dumplin', that she's a plus size girl who's just like totally fine with herself and she's okay with that. She like, and then from what I've gathered, she falls in love with the guy and like briefly starts to wonder if she's doubting herself, and then deals with the like, am I doubting myself? Why am I doubting myself? The kind of the questions that you go through when suddenly you're like, you want to impress a different person.
Yeah. So that really cool like moment, right, when you have complete self-confidence, but then all of a sudden you're like interested in someone else being interested in you. And so that where you lose a little bit of that confidence because you're kind of like, okay, but I like myself, but will they like me? And what do I need to do about this? And how do you negotiate those two things? So I'm super excited about reading it. So that's a YA contemporary, obviously, but that I'm still going to read.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to love.
If you hadn't picked up that book, I was going to pick it up for you.
Yeah, because it's super my wheelhouse. Okay, so this is Unhooked, which we talked about earlier. I have a couple things in here, though, that were really cool. First of all, she added a map to it. This is a map sticker that someone did of Neverland for her. And I'm obsessed with maps. This is a real thing. My entire stairway in my apartment is covered in various hand-drawn maps. And so when she did that, I was like, okay, so I was already like, you have my attention based on what you talked about in your panel, and now I'm like in love with you, so it's cool. And then she just drew some fun stuff in here. But, like, honestly, I think she was my favorite conversation because she was just fangirling about Holly Black and how she got to be on a panel with Holly Black. And it was amazing. And I was like, okay, but you are also a published author now. And if your book is half as awesome as it looks like it's going to be, like, you're Lisa freaking Maxwell. Like, she was like, I said with Holly freaking Black. Like, I was on a panel. And I was like, yeah, but you're Lisa freaking Maxwell. And she's like, I don't think I get the freaking yet. And I was like, I don't know, dude. Like, you are a published author. I think she actually had a couple other ones before this that I haven't read, but I will look them up, assuming I like it.
Yeah, her name sounds familiar, and I feel like I've seen it before, but I can't, off the top of my head, remember why or for what.
Yep. And then last,
we're both very excited.
Oh my God, I left Sword and Verse. I left Sword and Verse in the living room because I'm currently reading it.
All right, well, then you talk about yours first, and then we will talk about Sword and Verse.
I'll talk about An Infinite Number of Parallel Universes. This is a story about friendship. It's a bunch of teens go on a road trip together. Really interested in it. This is the kind of YA contemporary that does catch my attention, but also this guy is like my favorite human. And I say that about a lot of the people that were there, but seriously, he asked me what my favorite animal was, and then he drew me an owl. And it's an adorable owl, and I love it. And he was also incredibly nice. And I love, he also said, like, you are a cool person with great taste in books, because I bought his book, and that was hilarious, and it made me really happy. So I'm excited.
As it should. Okay, but then the final book, which Becca also got but does not have with her because she's reading it, I'm literally about to start this, is Sword and Verse by Kathy Macmillan, which I said was the one that I bought where I bought it blind and I really didn't know anything. And I was kind of partially buying it because the cover is kind of stunning. And all I gathered from when I popped it open and just like had read the inside was that it involved ancient libraries. And I was like, oh, sold. I like ancient libraries. You can give it to me. And Kathy Macmillan was super entertaining. She was great. I love her. She was great because she says, because we were geeking out over like the Library of Alexandria. This is what we geek out over, guys. And she's like, I can sense you are one of my people. Like, you are one of my people. I'm like, we're in the same club here. And she told me that the original title for the book was The Library of Gods. So in like gold Sharpie, she said, Sword and Verse, or The Library of the Gods. And I was like, that's a great title.
That was an amazing title, but apparently her publishers weren't nuts about it, and they said that not enough people would read it. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that sounds like the perfect.
Something called The Library of Gods.
Like, I would read it.
I'd be picking it up immediately. But she wrote, be bold, be brave, be bright. She put the date, and then she wrote something in this glyph language, which she created for this book. From what little digging I've gathered, she created a glyph language for this because it does obviously involve like ancient libraries and language. As she said, the 3 things to pitch this book are linguistics, libraries, and kissing. And I was like, you have my attention, dear lady.
And I can tell you from having read the first 150 pages that that's accurate.
Okay, so having read the first 150 pages, do we see anything about the glyphs in here?
You don't see them in the text, at least so far. So I don't know if at the end there's like a glossary, but they're described in fairly vivid detail. So I'm trying to keep track, because it's actually like, it's very ancient Egyptian glyph type of thing where each one is representative of a word.
Yeah.
So that like word that she wrote is actually a verse, from what I can tell. And we both got the same one that she wrote at the bottom in the language of the gods.
It'll be fun because we're going to have to translate it one more time.
Yeah, so basically it's like a puzzle, and now I have to figure it out. But so each one of them represents a word, and so you learn, and it's so cool. I'm a linguistics nerd, so I'm like really into this. But she does talk in the book, as the main character is learning this language, and how to read and write and whatever. The logic of putting the different words together to create different meanings, which as someone who studied ancient languages, like that's exactly how it worked. And so I like really appreciate her linguistic prowess there, and it's amazing. And it's just really fun. So I recommend it. Also, she's literally my favorite. Like, she's just like the sweetest, kindest of all nerds ever. And I'm sorry,
anybody can geek out with me over like the Library of Alexandria and like classicist topics. Immediately just like, we are in the same club. We are friend humans. And I am now going to very much anticipate anything else you write. And I really hope that I really like this book, and if it's a series, and if I really like this and it's a series, she'll have guaranteed me to read more. But she can just write about ancient libraries for life, and I will happily show up. Also, again, this cover is beautiful, and I can't help it. It's so pretty. But that was pretty much it, because after the signing, we pretty much just left. But it is an all-day affair. Our one word of advice is don't make lunch plans. Don't do it. I did not do it last year when I went, but I went with one other person. He kind of, I don't even know why he tagged along with me, because it so wasn't something he wanted to do. But I was like, I figured I was just going to sit my butt in a chair all day and just be like, yes, go to all the panels. And that is what I recommend anybody do for this. If you happen to live in the Maryland, Virginia, DC area, or can get yourself to this, it's usually the first weekend in March, if a pattern is anything to judge by, and stay for all the panels because it's great. And try not to be as nervous as me when you meet the authors, because you'll basically word vomit and end up regretting it intensely afterwards, which Becca could tell you, because I would not shut up about how painfully awkward I was.
She was really concerned about it, and I'm pretty sure she wasn't awkward, but it's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. But that is it. We have plenty of books to read now. You have more than me to read. And that is it. I look forward to doing this again next year. I have every intention of doing it next year. And so that's it from us today, you guys. Until next time, cheers.